Sometimes the world forgets its heroes, until something too loud to ignore writes their name in the sky. Let us know in the comments section below, what would you have done if you saw someone turned away from honoring their fallen brother? Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned to see how this story unfolds. Even Rodman knew better than to assume anything, especially when it came to the Army. He'd packed the wooden box himself, wrapped the corners in old t-shirt rags so it wouldn't slide around the trunk during the drive. He hadn't let the funeral home handle it. That wasn't their duty. It was his. A man like Eli Monroe didn't get passed along through couriers and administrative forms. You didn't box up loyalty and drop it at a desk. You carried it. Stephen had driven across 6 states, slept in his car once, and only stopped long enough to eat gas station sandwiches and stretch his legs. His daughter had begged him not to go alone. She even offered to fly out and drive him herself. He declined, same way he'd declined help since 1973. Now, standing at the wrought iron gate of the Patriots' Rest Military Cemetery, Stephen wore the same olive-drab jacket he'd been issued in '68, not out of nostalgia, because Eli's blood had soaked into its right sleeve. And today, Stephen was bringing him home. But someone was blocking the gate. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stand aside," said the young uniformed man, his clipboard pressed to his chest like a badge. The guard's nameplate read McAllister. His posture was crisp, his tone respectful, but flat. Protocol, not compassion. Stephen didn't flinch. "I'm here for the Monroe ceremony." McAllister gave the kind of tight smile you wear when you're about to disappoint someone. "This is a private family event. Only registered guests may proceed beyond this point. Do you have a name on the list?" Stephen tapped the box cradled in his arms. "This is Staff Sergeant Elijah Monroe. I'm not on the list. He is." McAllister blinked. His eyes darted to the box, then back to the list. He hesitated. For a moment it looked like he might bend. But the clipboard won. "I'm sorry, sir, I really am, but I can't make exceptions." Stephen stepped aside gently. Not defeated. Just not ready to fight yet. "Didn't come for a seat," he said quietly. "Just came to keep a promise." He moved to a shaded bench just outside the gate and sat down. He placed the box in his lap, his fingers gripping it lightly, reverently, like one might hold a folded flag. The sharp sounds of marching boots, distant brass instruments warming up, and murmured chatter from inside the gate all moved on without him. To them he was invisible. Except one man saw him. Lieutenant Colonel Martin Hale had retired from active duty 3 years ago. But once a soldier, always a soldier. He had arrived early to pay respects. Eli Monroe was a distant cousin of his wife's. It was supposed to be a short ceremony before heading back to D.C. But Martin paused as he stepped out of his car. His eyes caught on something across the parking lot. A bench. An old man sitting upright, not slouched, not defeated, but alert. Martin adjusted his tie, narrowed his gaze, and walked toward him. "You Army?" he asked without preamble. Stephen didn't stand. He didn't need to. "1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, Vietnam, '68. You?" Martin let out a short breath. "Intel, Kandahar." I thought I recognized that jacket. Stephen looked down at the box. "Staff Sergeant Elijah Monroe. He pulled me out of a foxhole while the rest of the world burned. He didn't come home. I brought him instead." Martin's jaw tightened. "They said I'm not on the list," Stephen added. He said it without bitterness. Just a fact. "Guess promises made in a jungle don't count at the gate." Martin Hale didn't speak right away. He looked at the gate, then at the clipboard guard, then back at Stephen. "You sit tight," he said, voice low. "Let me find someone who remembers what a real guest list looks like." Stephen didn't nod, didn't thank him. He just shifted slightly on the bench and looked toward the sky. Because above him the air was changing. The first rumble wasn't thunder. It was too sharp, too intentional. It was shaped like ceremony, built like a flyover. Rated noved. 4. They moved like clock hands across the blue canvas above. Amen. Then the fourth broke off. Stephen squinted, recognizing the maneuver. The missing man formation. He didn't know who was flying them, not yet. But someone up there knew he was here. And someone up there had just told the world this man belongs. Stephen didn't cry. He hadn't in years. Not when cancer took his wife. Not when his legs gave out and they pushed him to use a cane. Not even when they folded a flag into a triangle and handed it to him after Eli's parents passed, asking him to hold on to it since he was family in all the ways that counted. But sitting there, just outside the gate while the jet formation peeled through the sky, something cracked. Not a tear, not yet, but a shift deep in his chest, like a worn-out door finally giving way. Eli would have hated all this ceremony. And still, he would have laughed that Stephen showed up without an invite, same as he'd done back in Nam when he crashed a colonel's campfire just to steal decent coffee. The bench creaked as Stephen leaned forward, his eyes still tracking the lone jet veering west, disappearing into the horizon. Inside the cemetery walls a crowd had gathered. Stephen could see them in pieces. Slivers of suits, folded chairs, bright metals catching sunlight. Someone at the podium was already speaking, but the mic wasn't loud enough to carry this far. It didn't matter. Stephen wasn't here to hear speeches, he was here to deliver. A small boy in a navy blazer wandered close, pulling at his mother's arm as he pointed toward the jets. His mother followed his gaze, her eyes landing on Stephen and then quickly darting away, like she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to, like she wasn't sure whether to smile or apologize. She took the boy's hand and guided him away. Stephen took no offense. He was used to it, to the look people gave old men sitting alone with boxes in their laps. They didn't see ghosts or promises. They saw senility, maybe even delusion. But inside that box were bone fragments, recovered in 2005 from a jungle valley in Quang Tri province. Dog tags melted into shrapnel. A rosary Stephen had pressed into Eli's fist seconds before the explosion. They'd been surrounded that day, outnumbered, outgunned. Stephen had taken a round to the side, crawled behind a ridge with Eli dragging him like a sack of cement. "You hold tight," Eli had said, voice like gravel over dynamite. "I'll get us out of this, brother." He got Stetson out. He never came back for himself. 56 years. That's how long the jungle held him. 56 years Stephen waited for a knock on the door. And when it came, when the army notified him the remains were positively identified and offered to send them to the family, he said, "I am the family." He didn't want some packaged ceremony in a building. He wanted Eli buried next to the other fallen, his brothers. The military approved the request, but somewhere along the way, someone forgot to write down Stephen Rodman's name. Or maybe they didn't think it mattered. Old men and old promises rarely make it onto spreadsheets. A gust of wind blew dust off the sidewalk. Stephen shifted the box closer to his chest, his hands aching from the grip. It was then he heard it. Boots. Measured, confident, not hurried, not ceremonial. Martin Hale was coming back. "Mr. Rodman," Hale said, stopping in front of him. "You're coming with me." Stephen looked up, brow lifted. They changed the rules for ghosts now? Martin knelt beside him, his polished shoes clicking softly against the pavement. "I had a word with someone who outranks protocol. A certain pilot who just broke formation for that flyover." Stephen blinked. "The pilot?" "Captain David Monroe, Eli's grandson." Stephen let out a sound, part breath, part disbelief. "His mother," Martin continued, "knew about you. She told David this morning that Eli had a blood brother out there who might show up. David requested the flyover change personally." Stephen looked down at the box. "So he knows." "Or better." "He does," Martin said, rising. "And he wants you at the gravesite. Says you're the only one who should be holding the urn when it's placed." Stephen nodded slowly, then stood. His knees popped like rusted hinges, but he didn't ask for help. He held the box tight and followed Martin toward the gate. Staff Sergeant McAllister was still there, clipboard in hand. He stiffened as they approached. Martin didn't slow. "This man is with me," Martin said. "Update your list." McAllister looked like he wanted to argue, but one look at Hale's eyes shut that idea down. He stepped aside and opened the gate. Stephen walked through. The gravel crunched beneath his boots. Same gait he'd had since Da Nang. Up ahead, the rows of white headstones stretched across the manicured lawn like soldiers still standing watch. The podium speaker paused as they approached. A few heads turned. That's when Captain David Monroe stepped down from the front row and walked toward him. The resemblance was instant, same square jaw, same eyes. But it was the voice that did it. "You must be Stephen Rodman," he said, his voice soft and steady. "I've heard your name my whole life." Stephen's throat tightened. "Then your father raised you right." David reached out and placed a steadying hand beneath the wooden box, not taking it, just supporting it. A shared burden. "Walk with me?" he asked. Stephen nodded. They moved together, 2 generations apart, but bound by the same man. And as they reached the waiting pedestal where the urn was to be placed, the silence fell again. Not the kind you fill with words, the kind that means something. Stephen lowered the box gently, unwrapped the cloth, and opened it with care. He took out a bronze urn, simple, engraved with one line. "Staff Sergeant Elijah Monroe. We never left each other." Then he whispered, "Welcome home, brother." And the wind, for the first time that day, stood still. The reception tent near the burial site buzzed with quiet murmurs, clinking glassware and the soft shuffle of well-polished shoes on grass. The ceremony had concluded with full military honors, folded flags, final salutes, and the mournful notes of taps echoing over the rolling green hills. But Stephen didn't linger under the canvas with the crowd. He stood outside its shadow, just far enough away to hear it all but not be part of it. He had no suit, just that old olive-drab field jacket, the zipper stuck halfway up and one button was missing from the cuff. Still, no one questioned his presence now. His name wasn't on the printed program, but neither was Eli's story. And Stephen was the last one alive to tell it. He stood at the edge of a marble pathway that curved gently past the newest headstones. A breeze kicked up, warmer now, gentler. The kind that made you think for a moment that the dead weren't far. Behind him the crowd began to shift. Small groups broke off into pairs. Someone laughed. A restrained, respectful laugh. But it still cracked like glass in the silence of the cemetery. "You did something today," a voice said from beside him. "Most folks wouldn't." Stephen turned his head slightly. It was one of the younger men from earlier, a tall corporal who'd helped fold the flag. The crease lines were still sharp enough to slice a man's pride open. "You're with the detail," Stephen said. "Yes, sir. I noticed you out here and figured, well, sometimes the ones who stand farthest from the noise have the most to say." Stephen didn't smile, but his eyes flicked toward the young man, sharp and clear. "What's your name?" "Corporal Mason Atwood." "Well, Atwood, your instincts aren't bad." Atwood stood respectfully, waiting. Stephen didn't speak again for a long minute. Then, "Eli Monroe wasn't just my friend. He was my oxygen. In Nam, you don't get to choose who saves your life, but you damn sure never forget the one who does." Atwood nodded. "We read about your unit, the ones who held the perimeter outside Firebase deck." Stephen gave a short, tight laugh. "Held the perimeter? Son, we were the perimeter. 12 of us and 6 of us walked out." "Monroe was one of the 6? Stephen's hand tightened around the walking stick. "No. He was why any of us walked out." He turned then, finally facing Atwood. "They pinned a silver star to my chest for that week, but what they don't say in the write-up is that Eli carried me 50 yards under fire and then went back for 2 more. The 3rd time he didn't come back." The words hung between them, neither heavy nor light, just real. That kind of truth didn't age. It just got quieter over time. Didn't know he had a family back then, Stephen continued. Never talked about it. We all kept things close to the vest. But I made him a promise in that jungle. Said I'd find a way to tell them. All of them. And I never got the chance. He pointed gently toward the burial site. Until now. Atwood looked toward the tent. Captain Monroe looks like he carries it well. Stephen nodded. He does. You know what that flyover meant? Missing man formation. We learned it in protocol. No, son, not what it meant, what it said. Stefan took a breath. That pilot broke away to honor one man who died long before that jet was built, before Captain Monroe was even born. That break in formation, that was history folding in on itself, to salute one man who got lost in the paperwork. A long silence followed. Atwood broke it with a question most wouldn't dare ask. Do you think it matters now, after all this time? Stephen turned toward the sound of distant taps on cymbals, a small honor band beginning to pack up their instruments. He thought of the folded flag tucked beneath Eli's urn, of the way David Monroe had shaken his hand, gripped it like it meant something. I think, Stephen said carefully, that remembering someone the way they deserve to be remembered always matters, even if it's 50 years late, even if you have to fight your way past a gate to do it. Atwood looked down, then up again, thoughtful. You think they'll still remember me one day? Stephen studied him for a second, eyes narrowing just slightly. It depends. On what you choose to carry. And what you leave behind. Atwood gave a slow, firm nod, then saluted. Not stiffly, not out of ceremony. It was the kind of salute that belonged to something older than protocol, and Stephen returned it, not with his hand, but with a simple, worn nod. Behind them, the tent began to empty. One of the attendees, a woman in her 50s with a pin shaped like pilot wings, approached slowly. Her eyes shimmered, her hand pressed gently over her chest. She waited until she was close enough to speak softly. You're Stefan Rodman. He turned slightly, polite but cautious. Yes, ma'am. I'm Rebecca Monroe, Eli's daughter. Stephen's breath caught, but he didn't show it. You look like him, he said. She smiled, eyes glassy. I was 5 when he deployed. I don't remember his voice, but I remember the way he used to lift me up and sing when it rained. My mother never stopped waiting for that knock on the door. Stephen swallowed something hard. She got it eventually. She did, Rebecca said, but not like this. Not with this piece. He reached out and touched the box he still carried, the box now empty but heavier than ever. My son told me what you did, she added, and how you waited. I just want you to know, you weren't alone in carrying him all these years. We were, too. You helped bring us all back together. Stephen closed his eyes for a moment, just long enough to blink the weight away. Then I guess, he whispered, the promise is kept. And in the distance, a second jet could be heard, one flying lower this time, slow, deliberate. It didn't break formation, because now the man it honored was home. The banquet hall at the Air Force Heritage Center wasn't large, but every seat was filled. It had taken some convincing. Stephen hadn't planned to attend anything after the burial. He wasn't one for celebrations, especially not ones that had his name printed on the invitation in block letters. But when Captain David Monroe called him personally and said, "It's not about formality, Mr. Rodman. It's about finishing the story," something inside Stephen loosened its grip. Now he stood just inside the doorway, stiff in the knees but clean-shaven, hair combed, wearing a freshly pressed blazer loaned by the funeral director himself. For the occasion, the man had said. The room smelled like roast beef, black coffee, and starch. A few heads turned when he entered. Then, all at once, the buzz fell to a quiet murmur. David Monroe rose from the head table. He didn't say a word, just stepped out into the middle of the room and gestured gently towards Stephen, like a runway marshal guiding in something sacred. Stefan didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose to the center, where a microphone stood beneath soft overhead lighting. The hush in the room was total now, reverent but expectant. Stephen cleared his throat. He didn't prepare a speech. He'd learned long ago that truth didn't need rehearsals. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he began. His voice didn't tremble. It landed cleanly, like boots on dry earth. "And neither was Ely Monroe." The room held its breath. "I came to say goodbye to a man who saved my life, twice, once in combat, and once again, this week, when the world remembered him." There was no applause, no need. His presence was louder than clapping. Stephen continued, his fingers gently gripping the podium edge. "When I arrived at the cemetery, I wasn't allowed in. I wasn't on the list. They didn't know who I was. And that's fair, I suppose. I'm just an old man in a jacket, older than most of the folks here. But see, Eli and we never needed permission to be brothers. War made that decision for us." A few heads bowed. Some eyes glistened. "I promised I'd carry him home. Took me 56 years. A promise like that doesn't come with an expiration date." He looked toward David, who now stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the same way his grandfather used to stand during roll call. "And now," Stephen said, softer, "I get to meet the ones who lived because he never came back." The silence broke with a small voice near the back. "Sir, what was he like?" It came from a young boy, no older than 10, wearing a blazer a size too big and a Vietnam patch pinned awkwardly to the lapel. Someone had written "Honor" in capital letters on his name tag. Stephen smiled, the corners of his eyes creasing. Eli Monroe was the kind of man who'd give up his boots in the rain if yours had holes. The kind who never asked if you were afraid, just made sure you didn't feel alone. He sang when he shouldn't have, and he prayed even when no one else did. The boy nodded, wide-eyed. David Monroe stepped forward then, resting a hand gently on Stephen's shoulder. "My grandfather was the backbone of my childhood," he said to the room. "But I didn't know the whole man until this week. Until a stranger carrying a box taught me more about him than 20 years of bedtime stories ever could." Stephen looked up at him. "You weren't a stranger to him, son. He talked about having family one day, called you his maybe legacy. Guess you're more than that now." David knelt slightly, one knee to the floor, not out of weakness, but reverence. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a small leather case. "These belonged to him," he said, opening it to reveal an old compass, its brass worn down to soft gold. It was recovered in the same box. "I was going to keep it." He held it up between them. "But I think it belongs to the man who never lost direction." Stephen stared at it. For a long moment he didn't reach for it, just looked. Then, with deliberate care, he took it in both hands. "You sure?" he asked quietly. David smiled. "He'd want you to have it, and besides, I fly by satellite now." Laughter rippled gently through the room, the kind of laughter that washes away tension and turns strangers into family. After the ceremony, people approached one by one. A retired nurse who served with the USO. A mechanic who recognized Stephen's unit patch and asked about fire-based dagger. Even McAllister, the guard who had once denied him entry, approached with humility in his eyes and a hand extended. Stephen shook it without hesitation. "No hard feelings," he said. "Just make sure next time the list leaves room for the ones who kept the promise." As the crowd thinned, Stephen stood near the entrance once again, now holding a cup of hot black coffee. A couple of children darted by, laughing, chasing each other between tables. One of them, a little girl with a red ribbon in her braid, stopped suddenly and looked up at him. "You're the man from the sky," she said. Stephen blinked. "From the sky?" She pointed up, "The one the plane flew for." He knelt slowly, knees protesting but heart light. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "That plane flew for someone even bigger, a hero." She tilted her head. "Like in cartoons?" "Mom," he chuckled. "No cape, just courage." Outside, the sun had begun to set, but the light hadn't dimmed, not in the ways that mattered. Stephen Rodman walked out of the banquet hall that evening, not as a guest or a veteran or even a speaker. He walked out as something rarer, a man whose burden had finally been shared. And overhead, far in the fading blue, one jet circled once, then leveled into the sky. He didn't need to break formation this time, because everyone now knew Stephen had never been alone.